Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching Today I Found Out, and in the video today, the remarkable Nellie Bly and her adventure in a madhouse. Born Elizabeth Jane Cochran in 1864, Nellie Bly was considered the most rebellious of her father's 15 children. Yep, 15. Her family was thrown into poverty when her father died when she was just 6 years old, in a time when women weren't expected to hold down a job. This meant it was difficult for her mother to find enough work to support the family. By the time Elizabeth was 15, she decided to go to school to become a teacher. Unfortunately, she didn't have enough money to continue studying past the first semester, and she returned home to her mother in Pittsburgh. There weren't a lot of options there either. She helped run a boarding house, but full-time work it was difficult to come by. Not long after, Elizabeth read a series of articles by QO, or Quiet Observer, the pen name of one Erasmus Wilson, one of Pittsburgh's most well-known journalists. The man had quietly observed that women belonged in the home, no doubt barefoot, pregnant, and making their husbands dinner while simultaneously rubbing their feet and bringing them a beer. QO called working women a monstrosity. Elizabeth, she was pretty angered by these statements, as she knew that she and many other girls had to work to maintain some quality of life for themselves and for their families. Perhaps exhibiting that rebellious streak that her parents had discovered in her as a child, Elizabeth wrote a strongly worded letter to the newspaper about the offensive articles. They liked the spirited nature and quality of writing exhibited in her letter so much that they hired her on as a writer, giving her the pen name Nellie Bly. Her first article talked about the difficulties faced by poor working women, but the newspaper insisted that she covered stories for the women's pages. Nellie, she wasn't interested in writing about fashion though, and she soon quit and headed for New York, where she got her big break. On September 22nd, 1887, Nellie Bly was approached by the New York World to write an article about the inner workings of the notorious Blackwell Island Insane Asylum. They wanted to know what went on behind the barred doors and the smiles of white-clad nurses, and Nellie, she was determined to find out. The editor offered her no solid plan to get her out of the institution once her observations were completed, but promised her that it would be achieved somehow. Her instructions, they were simple. Write up things as you find them, good or bad, give praise and blame as you think best, and the truth all the time. But first, Nellie had to get herself committed, which meant that she had to feign insanity convincingly. She decided to pose as a poor girl looking for work at the temporary home for females under the name Nellie Brown. There, she started displaying insane behavior in an attempt to get herself committed. She said that she was afraid of the other women, she spoke vaguely, and spent the first night staring blankly at a wall rather than sleeping. She reported that another woman staying there said that she had a nightmare where a crazed Nellie rushed at her with a knife. Nellie's plan was working. The assistant matron of the house ended up calling for police officers in the morning to take Nellie away. Nellie was brought before Judge Duffy, who ruled that she had undoubtedly been drugged and had a doctor come in to examine her. She was then declared insane. She was examined by a second medical expert who said of her, "Positively demented. I consider it a hopeless case. She needs to be put where someone will take care of her." Now, the first of Nellie's observations about insane asylums were that they weren't very hard to get into. The doctors were incompetent in determining who was actually insane and who wasn't. Nellie met several other patients inside the mental institution that didn't seem to have anything wrong with them. Nellie and her comrades weren't necessarily ill-treated those next few days while they waited to be taken over to Blackwell Island. However, the food was subpar and the sleeping arrangements were chilly and uncomfortable. As her incarceration drew a bit of publicity, one of Nellie's biggest worries was that a reporter would come around and figure her out, because, as she said, if there was anyone who can ferret out a mystery, it is a reporter. Nevertheless, she managed to make it to the island undiscovered, and once on the island, Nellie watched as the patients were brought before the doctors. One woman had simply been sick with fever leading up to her commitment to the mental institution and was no more insane than Nellie was. Another woman was German, and since the doctors couldn't understand her, she wasn't given a chance to tell her story. When it was Nellie's turn, she was asked several questions, largely unrelated to the question of her sanity. The doctor was apparently far more concerned with the nurse with whom he was flirting. Bly decided to drop her feigned insanity and act as she did in her everyday life as soon as she got to the island. The nurses barely took notice, adding another concerning element to Bly's stay in the institution. She noted that the more sanely I talked and acted, the crazier I was thought to be. Asylum life, Nellie soon found out, was unsuitable even for the truly insane. She was forced to endure ice-cold baths, freezing nights, both verbal and physical abuse at the hands of the nurses, isolation, and fear of fire. The doors were individually locked, so there was no easy way to unlock them all at once, and the windows were also barred. If a fire broke out, it was likely the majority of the patients would die. Bly was only at the asylum for 10 cruel days, but she noted that what accepting torture would produce insanity quicker than this treatment. Take a perfectly sane and healthy woman, shut her up, and make her sit from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. on straight-backed benches. Do not allow her to talk or move during these hours. Give her no reading and let her know nothing of the world or its doings. Give her bad food and harsh treatment, and see how long it will take to make her insane. 2 months would make her a mental and physical wreck. At one point, Bly was visited by a reporter who knew her quite well. He was shocked to find Nellie Bly, where he thought to write an article on the insane Nellie Brown. Bly begged him not to blow her cover, and he didn't, saying only that she wasn't the woman he had been sent to see. He ended up leaving shortly after. Towards the end of her stay, Bly pressed the doctors for answers. How could they determine whether or not a woman was insane if they didn't listen to them? She insisted on a full examination to determine her sanity, but the doctors only brushed her aside. Bly wrote that the insane asylum on Blackwell's Island is a human rat trap. It is easy to get in, but once there, it is impossible to get out. Luckily for Bly, her editor made good on his promise to get her out of the place. After 10 days in the asylum, she was on her way back to New York. The first installment of her report on the conditions in the asylum was published a few days later. Readers were horrified, and Bly was made a celebrity of sorts, praised for her bravery during her time in the asylum. The doctors and nurses, they were full of excuses, but they were not heeded. Bly's story forced many changes to be made, and in addition, just under $1 million more was appropriated to the Department of Public Charities and Corrections, which is about $25 million today, as a result of her story. This allowed for better, safer conditions and better treatment of the patients. One of the women Bly had befriended during her stay said, "Ever since Miss Brown has been taken away, everything is different. The nurses are very kind and we are given plenty to wear. The doctors come to see us often and the food is greatly improved." Masquerading in an insane asylum, it wasn't the last of Bly's adventures. She went on to have a great many more, including traveling around the world in 72 days, almost completely unchaperoned, which was a much bigger deal back then for a woman particularly. This was done as part of a race with another reporter who was traveling in the opposite direction to see who could beat the other, and if it was possible to beat the 80 Days from Jules Verne's novel. During her trip, she actually even met Jules Verne in France. Bly would later marry an extremely successful businessman and herself become the president of the ironclad manufacturing company, making her one of the most prominent women in business in the United States for a time, besides being one of the more well-known female reporters. Not bad for a little girl born to one of 15 in a poor family when women were actively discouraged from venturing outside of the home for work. Now, if you're interested in reading more of Bly's adventures traveling around the world in 72 days, or indeed at the insane asylum, you can check out the complete tales, which are amazingly fascinating in her own words in Around the World in 72 Days and 10 Days in a Madhouse, which we're linking to below. So I really hope you enjoyed that video. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for brand new videos every day of the week. Also, I've got a podcast. It's called BrainFood. It's content just like this, but in the podcast form. We go into a bit more depth and really get into all of the details on a particular subject. Check it out through the links in the description below, or just search your favorite podcast app for BrainFood. And if you like this YouTube channel, I think you will really love that podcast. But if you want to watch something else right now, check out a related video from the past over there on the right. And as always, thank you for watching.